Welcome to this interview. I'm Megan Gibson, co-host of the Anxiety Super Conference. Today, I'm speaking with David Hanscom. David's orthopedic spine surgery practice focused on patients with failed back surgeries. He quit his practice in Seattle, Washington, to present his insights into solving chronic pain, which evolved from his own battle with it. His book, Back in Control, is associated with an action plan, the DOC Journey, which guides patients in solving mental and physical pain. His latest book, Do You Really Need Spine Surgery?, is intended for healthcare providers and patients alike to make an informed decision about undergoing spinal surgery. David Hanscom, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Megan. I am delighted to be here.
David, since your background is in surgical and pain management, I'd love if you could tell me what you've learned about the relationship between pain and anxiety.
It's the same thing. So people think about this carefully. What is pain? Pain is a danger signal. So too hot, too cold, too bright, too loud. So the way every living creature evolves is by paying attention to signals from the environment, and you have to protect yourself to actually function the next day. So we're programmed to function in a range of comfort. So we're not walking on hot pavement. We're not walking out in front of traffic. It's all automatic. So if something says danger, either to a person or an individual organ, like too hungry, bladder's too full, etc., your body gives off signals saying, look, you better eat, otherwise you're going to starve. So they're just signals of danger that create the sensation that we call anxiety. So anxiety is a description of a physiological state when your body senses danger. So anxiety is not psychological. It's a sensation generated by your body's response to danger, whatever the danger is. Either in a small scale or a large scale, there's a signal. So it's really critical that modern medicine get this right because the data is already there. What I'm saying today is not new news. There are thousands of research papers that say the same thing. Modern medicine is overlooking the data. So something threatens any part of your body or your body says danger. Your body secretes chemistry to allow you to survive. So it's the immune system, it's your metabolism or fuel consumption, muscle tension, heart rate, all those things go up in a fight or flight mode. That sensation is anxiety. The reason why it's so critical to get this right is because it's a physiological state. When I say physiology, I mean how the body functions. You just imagine a car sitting in the street. If it's not turned on, there's no symptoms. It's how the car runs is the physiology of the car. Well, the human body has 30 trillion cells, so the physiology is much more complicated than a car. But the bottom line is anxiety is an automatic physiological survival reaction that is much more powerful than the conscious brain. It's automatic and you can't control it. So it drives a lot of behaviors to cope with it, but in and of itself, anxiety is a physiological state. It is not psychological. I covered a little bit of too much ground there, didn't I?
No, you did great. And I think that's something a lot of people, we have to do a lot of work around, right? Because the modern take for a long time has been that anxiety is purely a mental illness or a mental disorder that we have to deal with, kind of detached from the body. And
Right.
as you've been so well saying that it's, even if we were going to call it mental illness, which I differ on, but it's not a mental problem, it's a physical problem, right? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, what the deep research shows, not just neuroscience, but in genetics, also in cell biology, is that all chronic disease, mental and physical, actually has the same cause. Same breakdown in regeneration function happens with mental or physical pain. It's the same thing. As one of my friends says, it's all the same soup. So any threat is a total body response to the threat. I mean, if a bear starts running at you, your mind doesn't just say, well, this is a bear. Your whole body responds instantly. So I don't like the word mind-body anymore because it implies there's a separation. So your nervous system is simply a communication center for complex functions. So you take a bacteria, it's one cell. A bacteria can survive on its own if it's put in a petri dish and given the right nutrients. Dr. Lipton is a friend of mine, and he's a cell biologist. He points out in the petri dish, if you put in nutrients, the bacteria gravitates toward the nutrients. If you put in stress chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol, the bacteria actually move the opposite direction. So every cell in your body has a capacity to survive on its own. The nervous system, of course, the human body is much more complex. So the nervous system is just that central relay station that coordinates your responses to the environment. So people think pain is, quote, psychological or in your head. Well, guess what? Everything is in your brain because it's all connected. It's all the same thing. So when we use the word stress, we think of some type of psychological construct. It's just a threat. And your body responds to it as a unit, both your physical part of it, the mental part of it, the chemical part of it, the metabolism or fuel consumption, everything responds as a unit. So that's why I don't like the word mind body anymore, because it implies a separation. It is not separate.
Would you say it's fair, based on what you're saying, that just like people have different tolerances for pain, people might have different tolerances for discomfort, since that's, if I'm hearing you right, that the nervous system's job is to help us avoid discomfort for our very survival, right? And our discomfort might have been around hot or cold or, a threat from a bear or whatnot. We've been developed to avoid discomforts because they protect us. And so some people might have just a lower threshold for discomfort and therefore a tendency for higher anxiety?
Well, that's a great question. So here's the deal. So I have a model called dynamic healing. So every living creature takes its circumstances or stresses or the environment, and it determines all this inputs coming in at the same time: visual, smell, feel, etc. By the way, humans have language, which is also sensory input. So your brain is processing all the sensory input. Then you have your nervous system itself, which can be calm or hyperactive. So if you have a hyperactive nervous system, it takes less stress to set off a fight or flight response. So you have the input, you have the nervous system, and you have what I call the output, which is the state of the body's physiology. So if you sense danger, your body goes into fight or flight. So if you can relax, you're on the beach drinking a beer, while your body goes into safety physiology, or when you sleep, etc. And that's when you regenerate to fight another day. So fight or flight is necessary for survival. It is how we evolved and how we survived, but you need to go into safety to regenerate your reserves in order to do fight or flight. The sensation generated when you're in fight or flight is what we call anxiety. It's just a description, just like we're on the beach drinking a beer, you're relaxed. So relaxed is not a diagnosis. Anxiety is not a diagnosis. It is a description. And so a friend of mine, Dr. Steve Porges, and his wife, Sue Carter, have taught me a lot about the autonomic nervous system. And we're working hard to get rid of the word anxiety and just state the word activated nervous system. You're just activated. So if you think about it from a logical standpoint, from an evolutionary standpoint, that the creatures that didn't pay attention to the cues didn't survive. So the sensation that we call anxiety becomes more and more repellent. It's intended to be incredibly unpleasant because it forces you to take action. But here's a catch with humans that my cat doesn't have. So if my cat sees a dog, she just goes crazy. It's unbelievable how badly she acts, or even another cat. And then when the cat or dog disappears, she lays down and takes a nap. Humans have a problem in that we develop language and consciousness. So we have lots of benefits from being conscious. Social cooperation, we went to the top of the food chain, but thoughts are a threat that we cannot escape from. So if you try to suppress your thoughts, it gets even worse. So whether you experience your thoughts, you have that fight or flight response that are unpleasant. If you try to suppress disturbing or negative thoughts, the fight or flight response becomes even more intense. So we're all subject as humans to that sensation of anxiety because of our thoughts. We cannot escape our consciousness. So that's the whole process I've been on for a long time, is that I thought anxiety was psychological. As a spine surgeon, I developed chronic pain in 1990, driving across a bridge in Seattle. I had a panic attack. So my way I dealt with anxiety was bring it on. I mean, I had a perverse mindset that I could take an unlimited amount of stress and you could not take me down. And guess what? People couldn't, except my body did. So what happened, I had a panic attack, which is a racing heart. I started to sweat. I felt like I was going to pass out. I was on a bridge at 10 o'clock at night and I thought it was over. So what's a panic attack? Okay, your heart's racing, you're sweating, you feel like you're going to pass out. That is physiological. So a panic attack is simply also a physiological state, but it erupts. So from that point on, I started having multiple panic attacks. I went from having no anxiety, none, I swear to God, I had no anxiety, to having crippling anxiety for 15 solid years. I kept treating it psychologically. I went into counseling and psychotherapy for 15 solid years with talk therapy. And I'm a huge fan of psychological input, except it doesn't work if it's just talk therapy. So go back to your question how people have different pain tolerances. Just consider the nervous system. Everybody is programmed by their past. In other words, everything you do today is programmed by your entire past up to this very second. So if you come from an abusive, chaotic childhood, which I did, your brain is programmed to sense danger all the time. I was hypervigilant. So it's similar to being a feral cat, which you can't get near this cat. It's on hyper alert all the time, just like I was. And being hyper alert all the time, quote, made me successful as a major spine surgeon, except it took me right down the other side. I crashed and burned badly. So the essence of chronic disease is a sustained exposure to fight or flight chemistry, the physiology of the output. If your nervous system's hyperactive, it takes less stress to set that off. So the essence of healing is minimizing your time in fight or flight and maximizing your time in safety. You can't get rid of fight or flight. You wouldn't survive. But
And you wouldn't want to, right? Yeah.
Well, we sort of want to. I mean, it's very unpleasant. And we can talk about the solutions in a little bit of detail. I can't go into all the details because it's not hard, but there are many layers to it. But in principle, the essence of chronic disease is sustained exposure to fight or flight chemistry. So that means adrenaline. So your heart's racing, your blood vessels are constricted, blood pressure's up, your cortisol is up. So you're consuming your own tissues for a fuel supply. So early degenerative arthritis, early Alzheimer's disease, early dementia, because your body's consuming itself to survive. The immune system, which I actually forget about, I'm embarrassed to say, is part of the fight or flight response. So your immune cells start consuming your own tissues. So right from medical school, we saw these horrible, disfiguring autoimmune disorders. I can't tell you how bad it can be. Colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, scleroderma, lupus, these are horrible diseases. But nobody ever really told us, well, why do they just happen? They don't just happen. So what's going on? So your immune system is actually attacking your body. So what sets it off is ongoing threat. So what happens is that when you're in fight or flight physiology, turns out that every chronic disease is from exposure to sustained fight or flight. That is mental and physical. So it turns out anxiety, depression, bipolar, obsessive compulsive disorder, and even psychosis or schizophrenia are inflammatory metabolic disorders. Turns out that dementia, Parkinson's, cardiac disease, hypertension, obesity are all inflammatory disorders. And that's just a short list. So those are the diseases. Cancer is felt to be chronic stress. My cardiology mentors 40 years ago, unfortunately, I've been at this for a long time. I remember them saying back clearly when I was an intern, first year in Spokane, that they felt that most cardiac disease was due to chronic stress. I'm going, what? So it made no sense to me because I would see these blocked blood vessels, et cetera, et cetera. But when your body's in constant stress or constant threat, you actually attack the linings of the blood vessels of your walls. So you get narrowing into the arteries because your blood vessels are being attacked by your immune system. So what happens, sustained threat physiology translates into diseases, but also symptoms. So when I was going through my chronic pain deal, I had 17 different symptoms, 17 at the same time. My ears are ringing, migraine headaches, back pain, neck pain. I had these skin rashes popping up all over my body. My feet were burning. I had stomach issues. The list just went on and on and on. Again, severe anxiety, severe depression. So they're gone. Every one of them is gone. So when you use the word of me managing chronic pain is actually solvable. And I think the reason why I've been successful, and I'm not the only one, by the way, but I take a surgical approach to non-operative care. So for instance, let's take one little issue that started the whole thing for me is sleep. So the research shows that lack of sleep actually causes chronic pain. It causes it. So I always thought that, well, people in chronic pain can't sleep, and that's partially true. But a great paper out of Israel showed that lack of sleep actually causes chronic pain. And they did not find the reverse causation. So I go, okay, I can do that. So again, taking a surgical approach, being very aggressive on sleep, within 6 weeks, I could get anybody to sleep. Usually require medications, but all sorts of other things you can do. And it was surprising that 20% of my people just had the pain disappear just with sleep. We also know there's a higher correlation of disability with lack of sleep than there actually is with pain. So then I started putting these tools into practice around 2006, but I didn't understand the neuroscience until about 2009 and really the last 5 years. But it turns out that, again, that there are a bunch of ways of actually calming down your threat physiology into safety. And as you learn the tools to do that, you get control, your body's inflammation goes down, and the physical symptoms consistently disappear. So it's not about managing chronic pain as much as solving it. And one final thing, go back to our podcast, is that anxiety is the pain. The mental pain is by far and away the worst part of the pain. It's much worse than the physical pain because you cannot escape your thoughts.
So I want to go into that just a little bit because you said something big there, which is, figuring out how to kind of reset and calm down your nervous system. So how do people go about doing that? And obviously I know you can't give us the entire process right now, but.
Well, let me tell you the principles. So what's happening, my book Back in Control was published in 2016 and gives a really nice framework as to the evolution of chronic pain. What's happened in the last 3 years, working with Dr. Porges and a whole bunch of group of very, very brilliant scientists, is that there's 3 parts of addressing this threat physiology. So again, anxiety is just a sensation generated by ongoing danger. So anxiety is a physiological state. So the first thing you do is address the physiology. So it turns out that the vagus nerve, or the 10th cranial nerve, is incredibly anti-inflammatory. So you can directly lower the output from fight or flight to safety. And I asked this rhetorical question, which nobody can answer, is that, okay, anxiety is just an activated neurophysiological state. How do you lower anxiety? So people can be lots of solutions, but the answer I'm looking for is simply lower the stress chemicals. So the first thing I do is say, look, just visualize a large thermometer on the opposite wall. This is what you have. It's a gift. It is not who you are. So this unconscious survival response is about 1 million times stronger than your conscious brain. It's a 1,000,000 to 1 ratio. So you're not going to conquer this or solve it. So you develop a working relationship with it. So I say, look, if you wanted to lower your anxiety, simply lower that thermometer. So you can do it with breath work. In other words, slow breathing between 6 to 10 breaths per minute will actually stimulate the vagus nerve, which is anti-inflammatory. Humming stimulates the 7th cranial nerve in the back of your throat, which actually stimulates the vagus nerve. There are certain pitches of music that Dr. Porges has figured out where you filter out the lower pitches, which are threatening in the animal world, and it's lullaby type music that actually you put earphones on and listen to this music. It's called the Safe and Sound Protocol that allows you to lower, again, stimulate the vagus nerve and lower the chemistry. Rubbing your forehead is the 5th cranial nerve. So you can put ice on your forehead, or you can put your face in cold water, can actually lower anxiety. It's very funny, but it's true. Dr. Porges changed the relationship with my cat. So you just scratch your forehead. It's unbelievable. But that's the 5th cranial nerve, which is very calming, very anti-inflammatory. It's been, so I learned that about 6 months. I learned this about 6 months ago. Go, wait a second, let's just try it here. So it's been pretty fun. So my cat loves to have her forehead scratch, but you're stimulating the 5th cranial nerve. So breath work is real. So you can directly lower your physiology. So that's the output. So then they take the nervous system. So let's pretend like I'm a feral cat. And when you're raised in a dangerous environment, you're in fight or flight all the time. That's all I knew. So I didn't even know there's another world. So the way you tame a feral cat, you don't talk to it, you don't logic with it, you use calming techniques. So you can use tone of voice, you can use touch, relaxation, but for humans, you have to teach the brain to be safe. So what doesn't work is talk therapy, because you're trying to fix something that's broken. You have to rebuild your nervous system. So good trauma therapists know this now. That's now becoming more and more clear. But the talk therapy by itself, this is not a psychological situation. You have to teach your body to feel safe. In other words, change your body's physiology to be more relaxed rather than always in fight or flight. So things like exercise have been shown to be very anti-inflammatory. Diet, anti-inflammatory diets, hugely anti-inflammatory. And then sleep. So sleep is huge. It's mostly at night when your brain cleans out the waste products from your brain during the day. Is a big filtering system. And you're also resting and regenerating. So sleep is probably the number one thing to actually address. And people are not going to heal until they actually can sleep. So anyway, the bottom line is there are ways of increasing the resiliency of your nervous system so it takes more stress to set off fight or flight. The final thing on the input is sort of a big one. So I'm going to talk about some of the simple ones. You've heard of mindfulness, of course. And what you do with mindfulness, you're changing the input. In other words, instead of being on racy thoughts, like just drop your shoulders for a second and feel your chair. I call it active meditation. It occurs about 3 to 5 seconds. Take a deep breath, let it relax. And you've just stimulated your vagus nerve, but you've also changed the input from racing thoughts to a different sensation. We actually use this during surgery for many years, mindfulness-based surgery, is that when you get into a distracting, anxious mode, we just take a deep breath, drop our shoulders, then I would connect to feel. So it can be any sensation, feel your chair, taste your food, listen to a sound, and surgery was feel the light touch of the instruments, and you get connected to the move. So my complication, by the way, rate went down probably 80% just by that mindfulness-based surgery. So mindfulness is a way of changing the input. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been criticized for not really solving chronic pain. That's not true. So with cognitive behavioral therapy, you're recognizing cognitive distortions, which fire up your fight or flight, like perfectionism, labeling, minimizing the positive, maximizing the negative, mind reading, et cetera. So if you realize that you're being fired up from a cognitive distortion, you just let it go. You don't have to deal with it. So right there, you've calmed down your fight or flight. So the one tool that I've used over and over and over again that is the core of the entire project, I almost feel like it's cheating. It's called expressive writing. Have you heard of this tool?
I want you to explain it because I've definitely heard of it, but I don't know if it's the same context as what you've.
So I'm gonna hold up.
I have that book.
Called,
yeah.
Okay. So Dr. Penny Baker, I know him pretty well now. We've talked back and forth quite a bit. He's learning a lot more about chronic pain, but it goes back to the obsessive thought patterns, which probably we might have a different podcast on this because obsessive thought patterns that people sort of jokingly call the monkey mind are just torturing people right now. So when I had my obsessive compulsive disorder, it was manifested by very disturbing visual, almost hallucinations of really disturbing thoughts. So they were horrible, and I'm actually fine. And it turns out that when you try to suppress a thought, it becomes stronger, right? And he points out in his research, Dr. Penny Baker does, that the more you try to suppress a thought, not only does it become stronger, it becomes a lot stronger. So you take some crazy, bizarre thoughts, and again, there are trillions of thoughts in your brain, you toss it aside. It has nothing to do with who you are. So this happens to the more well-intentioned, conscientious people. So you take some crazy thought, toss it aside, it keeps coming back, coming back. Every time you tossed it aside, you just gave it more neurological attention. So what starts as a nothing becomes like a parasite in your brain. It starts to grow, then it becomes a demon. And it's sort of perverse that the more your identity is attached to a certain skill, that becomes your worst demon. So never can figure out why beautiful models have such body image disorders. Well, the brain's saying, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. So of course you suppress that thought and it gets worse. So same thing with physics, mathematics, athletes, et cetera. The more you try to achieve a certain level of performance, your unconscious brain is saying, no, you're not, no, you're not, no, you're not. So remember, the unconscious versus conscious brain is a huge mismatch. So it turns out that your demons are actually who you are not, right?
Right.
And so it doesn't help in a way because these thoughts become so powerful, you don't know what to do. So what the expressive writing does, and they pointed to us this really clearly, that there's over 1,200 research papers that document simply writing down your thoughts and tearing them up. They don't solve it. They separate you from your thoughts. So it's the number one thing that has to be done It should be done by every human being every day on this planet. It would change this planet's reactions to pain. So it's a separation process. The reason why people tear it up is for two reasons. One of them is to write with freedom, because the crazier the thoughts that you express, the better. But also, as you write, all these issues come up. They're not issues, they're just thoughts. So you can't control your thoughts, but you can separate from your thoughts. So it turns out that the most well-intentioned people have the worst problem with this because they have a higher tendency to suppress thoughts. So it's even worse, and this gets a little bit tricky here. So the research shows that the opposite also occurs. In other words, the more of a well-intentioned person you are, let's say you want to be happy. The research shows if you try to be happy, you'll end up sad. And why is that? Or I want to be a compassionate doctor, or whatever it is. So yes, a rational construct in your conscious brain is trying to find ways that you might not be that way.
Mm.
Does that make sense? Okay, so I
Yeah,
want to be
so it's seeking out that
happy.
which you aren't in order to help you become what you want to be.
Right, but it's such a mismatch that it ends up working backwards. So it turns out the more well-intentioned you are, the worse the problem, which is really tragic because the most well-intentioned people are the ones that could do the most good on this planet. They're the ones that are tortured by anxiety. So people that are sociopaths and bully aren't really burdened by good intentions, right? It's a problem. And we're seeing it play out all over the world with dictators all over the world doing really terrible things to people. They're obviously not well-intentioned. They're not really burdened by anxiety. They're just sort of doing what they want to do. So the people that could actually be of the most benefit become crippled by anxiety because of this process. It's called the ironic effect. It's based on what's called the need for mental control. So these top researchers in the world, psychologists, pointed out that the only factor that breaks this up is expressive writing. That's it. That's simple. That's it. Now, they've done lots of research on the types of writing. I just wrote a PDF that I can send to you to put on the show notes, looking at expressive writing in detail. But after 15 years of solid chronic pain, of looking every direction I could find to figure this thing out, Dr. David Burns wrote a book called Feeling Good, and he said to write. So I started to write. So it's a great book, and I thought it was the book, and it partially was, but it's expressive writing that within 2 weeks, things started to shift. And by 6 weeks, things had shifted a lot. And by 6 months, I was fine. My OCD was gone, which is unbelievable. I mean, the prognosis for OCD is really terrible. So the expressive writing is a big deal. And I have to say one more thing about OCD. I think it's an epidemic right now. People don't want to talk about it. I do not like psychological diagnosis. The bottom line is an activated inflammatory nervous system. And there's two parts to solving these obsessive thought patterns. One of them is diverting the thoughts. Okay, that's what the expressive writing does. But the other ones, you have to turn down the heat. So it's when I cross my own anger threshold and calm down my nervous system, change the input, that's when the OCD disappeared. So it takes both. And OCD is considered untreatable. That's not true. I've walked dozens of people out of this situation. It's completely solvable. And again, what I'm finding out, people can actually get rid of their physical pain, but these intrusive, disturbing thoughts just torture them. And it's pretty universal, and nobody wants to talk about this. So I'm working with a young daughter of a friend of mine who is, about 8 years old, and she is tortured with panic attacks, obsessive thought patterns, all sorts of stuff. So we've learned to teach her to regulate your body's physiology into more safety. So within a month, her panic attacks are gone. She's coming out of the house. She's relaxing. And it works in any age. And it's not hard to solve once you understand the problem. So you have the input. You can change the input. You can work on building up the nervous system. And you can directly lower the output. Again, the essence of the solution is that when your stress is overwhelming your nervous system, you're going to go into fight or flight. So we can teach you how to process input more efficiently. We can increase the resiliency of your nervous system. We can teach you tools to directly lower that chemical response, and they all work. You use them multiple times a day. And some days when the stresses are overwhelming, doesn't matter how good you are at this, you're going to go into fight or flight. That's normal. So there's no nerve. I mean, life is life. It keeps coming at us. So some days when you're sleeping well and life is good. You can process almost any stress. If circumstances are sort of bad, where you haven't slept well, haven't exercised, and you don't feel good, you're not going to do well. But it's a very dynamic healing process. So what I call dynamic healing is that you learn how to process the stresses more efficiently. You build up the resilience of the nervous system, and you learn how to directly lower your fight or flight response. I do want to go back to the whole thing about aggressive spine surgery and structural issues. 90% of all symptoms in the body are created by your body's physiology. So we talked about the different symptoms. We talked about the diseases. So what we're doing in medicine right now is we're treating just the symptoms. You get a migraine headache, we'll give you migraine medications. Irritable bowel syndrome, we'll give you some medications for that. But the issue is the stresses versus your coping skills. So in modern medicine, we think things are structural. So we're not acknowledging the person's stresses. We don't know who they are as people anymore. We don't know their coping skills. So let's say I treat somebody's stomach pain with medications and they go home to an abusive spouse. That's not going to work, right? Not going to work. So there's some things that are pretty hard to solve, but the bottom line is that the business of medicine has taken away our capacity to talk to our patients. I do not want to throw doctors under the bus because they're incredibly well-intentioned and work incredibly hard. But I'll use the word persecuted. We're actually being persecuted if we take time to talk to our patients. And so how do I get to know who you are? How to know what your life is? I'll tell you one quick story where I had one gentleman with neck pain, about 70 years old, super nice guy. Here was his wife and about 40-year-old daughter. He had had neck pain for 5 years. So I said to my fellow, this isn't this hard. It doesn't take much time to figure this out. There's a simple question of what's going on. What was going on with this guy is that his paranoid schizophrenic grandson had killed his father, who was his son, murdered him.
Oh,
that's the problem. That's the diagnosis. It's not neck pain. So the family stress living with a paranoid schizophrenic grandson that does so ill that he actually shot his father, that's stress. So when you're under that kind of stress, what's your body's chemistry doing? So 90% of symptoms in the body are physiological. Have you heard a term called medically unexplained symptoms by chance?
No, tell me about it.
Called MUS. It started about 2002. And so doctors feel if they can't see something on a test, it must be psychological. Well, again, we talked about the body's physiology. Symptoms are physiological, not psychological. And so it's a deadly diagnosis because what the doctors are saying is, well, we know you have pain. And again, they're not acknowledging the mental pain or anxiety very well. And so we know you have pain. We don't know exactly why you have it. And we'll do our best you can to manage it, but you're going to live with this the rest of your life. Well, we also find out that lack of hope is actually inflammatory. We just made the problem worse. So now they now they have a label, medically unexplained symptoms, or MUS, but their hope is gone. So we didn't help you. So that's when I actually quit my practice to do this in 2019 because we're basically doing spine surgery on anxiety. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. The success rate for a spine fusion for back pain is about 25%.
It's not a great rate, is it?
It's not good. And we also find out that if you operate in the presence of a hyperactive, fired up nervous system, that we actually can induce chronic pain at the new surgical site or worsen the pain you have between 40 to 60% of the time. So we have actually double the chance of making you worse than making you better. Then I was a salvage surgeon who was trying to do the extra surgery to actually solve the problem. And it would help a lot of people, but it's mostly with the rehab and calming down the nervous system, not the extra surgery. So I've seen hundreds of patients going to pain-free. When I say pain-free, in other words, they've broken out of this chronic pain cycle. They get to thrive. And I'm watching people badly damaged by spine surgery. And I just could not watch it anymore. So unfortunately, I'm not as hard as I'm trying. The incidence of spine surgery keeps rising. We keep training more spine surgeons. And unfortunately, this last 5 years, we're not training doctors to talk to the patients at all. It's all about production. So we're really hurting our population badly right now in medicine, not just with spine surgery in all realms. But again, your symptoms are actually MES, medically explained symptoms. They are completely explained by your body's metabolism and inflammation and fight or flight response, completely explained. All 17 of my symptoms are gone. No more burning sensations. My ears don't ring. I don't have migraines. My anxiety is normal. I'm not tortured by anxiety anymore. I had a major depression that's been far gone. And I will say, my wife keeps reminding me, if I quit practicing the techniques that I just described to you, my skin rashes pop up, my scalp starts to itch, my sleep goes awry. So it's just an ongoing daily dynamic process, and why we call it dynamic healing. So dynamic healing, we teach you how to process the stresses better, increase the resilience of your nervous system. Then the symptoms, we'll treat the symptoms, but if you put it in the context of the whole person's response to the environment, is successful.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place for us to wrap it up. And it's such a great reflection that and also that you have that mirror in your partner that you can say, hey, you're not practicing what you know works.
That's what spouses do, right?
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
And proof that you've got to practice what you know to be true in order to, everything that you tell everybody else is also going to be true for yourself. So
Yeah.
I loved everything that you shared with us.
Yeah. I mean, the exciting part, once you quit having to fight off this huge survival reaction of anxiety, you can thrive at a level that's unbelievable. I mean, I'm thriving at a level that I did not know was possible. And once you learn how to process this survival reaction, then you're free. So it's just been really wonderful to watch people break free. They go from no hope to a whole new life. And it's not very hard. It does take the steps. And I will talk about the DOC journey just for a second. It's called Direct Your Own Care.
Yes, please.
It's a sequence. The sequence is critical. You can't just go from pain to play in a heartbeat. So remember, anxiety is a neurophysiological state. So is play. Now, if you're doing play just to distract yourself, that doesn't work. So there's a sequence of just starting tools to start calming things down. Then you go into the principles. Then we go into anxiety, awareness, and anger. And anger is always a tipping point. And so we go through a sequence that allows you to start reconstructing your nervous system, learning tools to actually navigate more life efficiently. And the biggest factor that determines success is simply engagement. We also just put an app out last week called the Doc Journey app. Same thing. It's more of a experiential play app, which has been we're excited about it. It's based on our workshops. And so again, you cannot have anger and awareness in the same room. Awareness is the essence of the problem. You have to know what the situation is before you can change directions. But eventually, as you develop curiosity, gratitude, and play, that's a profound shift in your body's chemistry. People heal. So again, it's been very rewarding. And I can't tell you how exciting it is to watch somebody with no hope not only regain hope, but actually thrive. It's just been really quite an experience for me.
And what a transformation in a career, and what an altruistic kind of shift that you've made to help other people in this way.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about it.
Well, I appreciate you being with us today, David. How can people find out more about you and the program that you just mentioned?
So it's just you can just look up the DOC Journey on Google, or is the docjourney.com. The app is on Google and also on the App Store and Apple, and easily downloadable. And then my book is Back in Control, a surgeon's roadmap out of chronic pain. Then the surgical book sounds like, well, it doesn't apply to me. Please do not undergo spine surgery without reading this book. I break the decision-making process into just two factors. There's 4 quadrants, and it's not very hard to decide. But you don't want to undergo surgery on a normally aging spine. That's a really bad idea. So please, it's called Do You Really Need Spine Surgery? It's a really helpful book, really clarifies things.
Fantastic. Thanks again for being with us, David.
Thank you.